What is going on, everyone? Phil here for KO Gaming, and welcome to another edition of the Hateful Truth video game review series, where I bring you maximum truth and minimum bullshit regarding the latest game releases. Today we're going to be talking about the newly released Xbox One exclusive Quantum Break, a game we've been hearing about for 3 years as a system seller for the Xbox One, developed by Remedy Studios, the same guys that made Max Payne 1 and 2, as well as Alan Wake and its later expansion, American Nightmare. Now, Quantum Break has been criticized heavily over the past week for kind of having an identity crisis. On the one hand, it's an action-based third-person shooter with sci-fi elements. On the other hand, it's a collection quest for little items and logs. It has an ongoing mystery, quite an interesting sci-fi narrative, and it also has live-action cutscenes that are actually determined by critical story point choices that you make during the course of the game. I'm about to talk about all of these points and let you know what I liked and what I disliked in the following review, so let's get started. First off, the most unique thing about Quantum Break is undoubtedly the integration of live-action cutscenes. At 4 points during the story of the game, there will be a critical decision that you have to make. And based off of that decision, you will view a 20-plus minute long live-action cutscene that pretty much has production quality of, say, a standard sci-fi thriller that you may watch on Fox television. They spared no expense with the cast, including well-known actors such as Littlefinger from Game of Thrones, Agent Broyles from Fringe, this guy from Lord of the Rings, and you're going to notice many other people during the course of the game who are notable characters you've probably seen from other things, including the main protagonist who just recently played the young detective on the TV thriller show The Following. So it really is cool to see the live action as well as the in-game kind of voice acting play out. You could tell motion capture was employed, and if anything, the production value of this game when it comes to the narrative and the way that it unfolds is top-notch. You're going to really feel like you're participating in almost an interactive TV thriller series, and that's a pretty unique thing about the game that should be applauded. Outside of the live-action cutscenes, the gameplay mechanics of Quantum Break are twofold. Third-person, action-based gameplay with shooting mechanics and also time manipulation abilities. Think, say, Infamous, where you have superpowers that you can use in a third-person shooter-style game, combined with collection of collectibles, logs, and other things that are going to flesh out the story of the game. They go hand in hand, and quite honestly, you really do need to search for all of the collectibles in this game. There are many critical little logs and emails that if you don't read them, you're not going to get the full picture of what's actually going on in the story of Quantum Break. Now, the problem here is the dichotomy between the two. It really seems like they put a huge emphasis on hiding collectibles, putting all kinds of supplemental story into the game, and these live action cutscenes. When you actually get to the points of the game that are third person action, a lot of the times it almost seems like they were wedged in there just for the sake of saying, oh, there's a lot of gameplay in our game, so allow me to explain. At first, the gunplay of Quantum Break seems kind of like standard third-person shooter fare. You're going to run behind some kind of basic cover, you're going to be peeking out to shoot a few times, move to the next piece of cover, reload your weapon, maybe gathering weapons and ammo along the ground, wash, rinse, and repeat. Nothing too special here. You've pretty much done this all before. But it really starts to mix it up when you get your time manipulation mechanics during the course of the story. And the more abilities that you unlock, the more unique and interesting the gunplay gets. You can create a barrier around yourself to deflect bullets and slow time. You can actually create a barrier around enemies that allows you to queue up a ton of bullets as you shoot at them, and then they all hit them at once for one super-powered blast. You can have an explosion that will actually take out a group of enemies out in the field. You can run super fast and also slow time. So there are various different abilities that you're eventually going to slowly unlock over the course of the game. Now, some of these are going to unlock naturally on their own, and then you can upgrade them by collecting hidden pockets of energy that are hidden throughout the game. This game also has the infamous kind of see everywhere vision that you've seen in games recently, like Batman and stuff like that. The Witcher 3 comes to mind. So you're going to be using this constantly to detect where your enemies are and also look for collectibles and these hidden little pockets of energy so that you can upgrade your abilities over the course of the game. Now, the problem with this is that it really doesn't do anything different. We've played third-person shooters before where you have maybe some special abilities. As I brought up, Infamous comes to mind. So it's not just a standard third-person shooter. It does integrate a few things over the course of the game, but it really does feel like you're playing a very generic third-person action game. The enemies are so cliche. Yeah, every once in a while you'll have an enemy that maybe is immune to your abilities or can dash just as fast as you, but outside of that, their AI is almost terrible. The only way that you'll really die in this game is if you really do a boneheaded move like running out into the open, or if an enemy spawns behind you, which actually happened to me a couple of times during my playthrough. But for the most part, it's wash, rinse, and repeat basic generalized third-person shooter gameplay that you've done in a million other games before. Even the enemy types are so generic. There wasn't one enemy or boss or anything in Quantum Break that I can't say, wow, that was unique and that was different from anything that I've done in another game. It was very cookie cutter, and I think they really tried to play it safe, almost to the point where I think that they integrated this gameplay to say, oh look, this is a video game with lots of gameplay, rather than saying, well, it's a narrative-based game and we didn't want to shove in gameplay because we wanted the story to tell itself. A lot of games have been criticized for this recently, games like Beyond Two Souls, or any of the Telltale episodic games, or last year's Life is Strange. Very low on gameplay, but very high in narrative. And the bottom line is these gunplay segments seem almost wedged in. I mean, it's pretty ridiculous. How many hundreds of generic guards for this private corporation is the protagonist going to kill in the course of this game? He probably racks up hundreds of bodies and never bats an eye. For someone who's not a trained soldier and has never been in combat before, this makes absolutely no sense, and these combat parts of the game actually seem out of place for the narrative. Speaking of the narrative, this is really where Quantum Break shines. I put the story of this game right on par with popular sci-fi thriller television series such as Fringe. It really has a cool, unique kind of web that it spins over the course of the game. You basically, at the beginning of the game, end up running into a time machine, going through time inadvertently. There's people who are dying around you. It's people who are saying that the time is going to end, and all of a sudden you gain these superpowers where you can actually manipulate time, and you're trying to defend yourself from this private military force that are trying to track you down and kill you. You end up running into other people who know about time manipulation and time travel and are basically trying to save time, while it seems like a person who used to be one of your most trustworthy and closest friends is now out to kill you. It's a pretty unique premise, and over the course of the game you're going to run into a wide cast of characters, all of which are really good in their roles. The game really does a great job of tying up loose ends when it comes to time manipulation as well. A lot of these movies and shows that deal with time travel end up saying, well, here's a big loophole because this happened and it was never explained. In the final act of the game, it almost ties up everything going on in the game that was not explained, which is really awesome. And overall, I have to say that the story of Quantum Break, if you're into sci-fi and time travel, you're going to absolutely love the narrative of this game. But the question is, are you going to want to suffer through generic third-person shooter gameplay in order to get to it? Now, another criticism I have is the huge amount of collectible logs and emails that you have to find to read manually to understand the story of the game. And I'm all for these collectibles. As you know, over the years, when I'm playing different survival horror games and thriller-style games, this is traditionally a way in video games for you to flesh out the story. But there is just an incredible overabundance of these in the game, and you're going to probably find 75% of the time that you're actually playing Quantum Break, you're going to be reading something off of an iPad, off of someone's computer screen, off of an email, and it just gets to the point where it's like, man, even with the great story, I wish this could have been fleshed out with more live action, or at least some dialogue, spoken reading words here, is really pissing me off. Why can't they do voice acting for these emails? It just really stacks it on really heavy. And also, there is the collection of these upgradable pockets of energy that give you better abilities during combat. That's all well and good, but a lot of them are pretty easy to find, while others are really just, how the hell do I get to that one? And it's not even really readily explained early on in the game that you're supposed to be looking for these things. You could miss a bunch of them right at the beginning of the game. I understand what they're going for here. They didn't want the game to be all too much of one thing. If it was too much story, people would say it's too narrative heavy. If it was too much third-person combat, they'd say it's too generic and gunplay heavy. If it was too much exploration, they'd say it's too much of that. But really, the game kind of ends up feeling like it's too much. It tries to do too much. It doesn't seem like a coherent whole. It seems like one really interesting, coherent sci-fi story with crappy generic third-person gameplay thrown in, and of course way too much exploration looking for these vlogs that you have to read. So it just doesn't fit. It doesn't feel like a whole at the end of the day, and that's a major problem that I have with Quantum Break. Ultimately, how much you get out of the game is going to depend on how much you like it and how much time you want to take playing it. If you look for every log, if you're watching all of the live action cutscenes, a playthrough is probably going to take around 10 to 12 hours, especially if you have a few issues with some of the areas at the end of the game that become pretty insanely difficult, throwing wave after wave of repetitive enemies at you. If you rush through this game and you don't care about the story and you're not looking for the collectibles or the upgrades or the vlogs and you're skipping the live action cutscenes, you could probably beat Quantum Break within 5 hours. And I have to draw the parallel to the Order 1886 last year, which a lot of people have been comparing Quantum Break to. I'll be honest with you. Quantum Break is better than the Order 1886 because it's not a bait and switch. It didn't say that it was one thing and give you something else like the Order did. In addition, it has a really interesting and fun story. Yes, the gameplay is kind of ridiculously generalized and boring and just commonplace, but the story work around it is exceptional. The Order 1886 didn't have that. All it really had was pretty graphics. So at least in that regard, Quantum Break does excel. But a game, again, that you can buy in this day and age that you can beat in 5 hours if you don't really care about the story, it's hard to justify a purchase. Now, the other thing is, you might say, but what about replayability? You know, $60 for 10 to 12 hours, but then you're going to want to go back and you're going to want to replay the whole game to do those opposite story choices, right? Well, I actually dabbled with that idea this week and said, gee, maybe I will go back to Quantum Break and do kind of an offline playthrough where I edit around all the generic gameplay and I just get to those choices and I show how the live action cutscenes change. But the bottom line is, after I beat the game today, I have no desire whatsoever to ever play this game again. That's how just generic and trite and boring the third-person combat gameplay is. It's so bad, I don't even want to replay the game to see the other half of the story because I don't ever want to do that gameplay again. Yeah, I mean, I know that's a bold statement, but it's true. I have no desire to do this stupid cover base, use the slow mobility, fire, shoot, bullet sponge enemy. We've all done it before, and I don't want to ever do it again. So if that says something, it says that the gameplay that they wedged into this game hurts the game, and they should have maybe gone for something else. Why couldn't this have just been a narrative-based experience, like Beyond Two Souls? I don't understand it. It could be that because Remedy made Max Payne 1 and 2 and Alan Wake, they said, we've got to implement our classic third-person shooter gameplay, but no one actually sat down with them and played the game and said, it's not very good, I like the story, do something else. I just gotta kind of shrug and say this game just is a kind of a weird anomaly, and overall, it's kind of disappointing. So let's review the positives and negatives. Positives: great voice acting, great motion capture, great live action cutscenes because you have a top-notch cast of real-life actors. In addition, the story is very gripping, it's interesting, it has a thriller aspect, but by the end of the game pretty much ties up almost all the questions that you have about the events of the game, and it's really well laid out in that regard. I also would like to compliment the graphics. I think they did a great job with the environment. There are some issues with pop-in and loading, but once the stages load, they look pretty sweet, and especially when you're going through different time periods and stuff, it's pretty cool, and I definitely enjoyed it. And of course, you've got that unique aspect of being able to make critical story decisions 4 times within the plot of Quantum Break. It can definitely add to replayability if you desire to go back and play the game a second time. That's a cool thumbs up for me. I like the ability to actually concretely change things in the game, and it definitely does. Negatives. First of all, way too much item collection. When the majority of gameplay in your game is reading something from text rather than listening or watching or participating or interacting, that's a problem. And in Quantum Break, 90% of the time that you're wandering around is going to be searching for these logs and hidden items that are going to unlock supplementary story. There's just far too much of it. Also, there are some game bugs that I noticed with the physics of falling in the game. Twice during my playthrough, I actually got caught either in a place I wasn't supposed to be, or even just in an area that I was supposed to be jumping. I kind of get caught in midair, infinitely falling, and I had to reload from a checkpoint. The checkpoints were frequent, so that was good, but it was still pretty annoying. The third-person shooter gameplay in Quantum Break is very cliche, it's very general, it's what you've done in a million other games before. All of the enemies here are incredibly generic. It's pretty bad, and I really feel that the major problem with Quantum Break is that this third-person shooter-style gameplay was kind of wedged in to an otherwise awesome story. It doesn't even seem to really make sense. You're killing hundreds of people, bodies are piling up for someone who's never killed anyone before. It really just is nonsensical. And then last, the fact that, yeah, the game actually could be beaten relatively quickly if you skip all of the wandering around looking for the optional logs, and the fact that the third-person gameplay was so bad that I didn't even want to go back and replay the game because I was so fucking bored with it after my first playthrough. That's pretty sad that I don't even want to see the opposite side of the story because of it. That is a big no-no for Remedy. And so, sadly, Quantum Break ends up being ultimately disappointing. A game without a set identity. It tries to do too much, being both a third-person action game, an exploration game, and an interactive narrative all at once. It just is too much. You can tell that certain things were kind of wedged in or didn't belong. They're not coherent in the whole scope of a full, complete game. And sadly, for a system seller for the Xbox One, I can't even really recommend it for more than a weekend rental. Because once you play through it once, you're going to really hate going through that combat again, and you're not going to want to ever play it again. It's sad because I really like Remedy as a studio, and I really enjoyed Alan Wake, although admittedly, even that game dragged on a little bit too much with that repetition in the third-person gameplay, and it really shows here years later with their next game that they're still doing more of the same. They really needed to innovate a lot more, and it really is a shame with the live-action cutscenes that make this game unique. It's not enough to warrant a purchase. I'm going to give Quantum Break a 6 out of 10, just slightly above average because of the integration of these live-action cutscenes, the high quality of the acting and voice acting, but for the gameplay elements that are in the game, it drags it way the hell down, and I never ever want to play this game again. Sorry, Quantum Break, for a game that's supposed to be in system seller, you were a quantum disappointment. Well, that wraps it up for another edition of The Hateful Truth. Hope you enjoyed the show, and if you did, please check the description of the video for several links. One that'll lead you over to DSP Gaming, where you can actually watch my raw playthrough of the game in full. There's also an Amazon Associates link that you could use, as well as a link to my Patreon, where your pledges can help me do this full time. Thanks a lot for watching, everyone. I really appreciate your viewership, and I'll see you next time for another edition of the Hateful Truth Review Series. Peace out.